Imagine this. You're standing in your own front yard, watering the grass, minding your business. Suddenly, two men in uniforms march up. They've got badges, they've got guns, and they look every bit like real officers. They demand your ID, your hands behind your back, and they tell you, you're under arrest. Now here's the twist. These men, they aren't real cops. They're pretending to be, and they have no idea who they're messing with, because the man they're trying to intimidate, the man they're trying to handcuff, is one of the most feared FBI agents in the entire country. This story begins in a quiet suburban neighborhood where appearances are everything. Perfect lawns, picket fences, neighbors who wave as they drive by. But beneath that calm surface, tension was building. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, had been cracking down on what they called violations. Everything from leaving your trash bins out too long to the color of your front door. But this time, things went way too far. The HOA wanted control, and they weren't afraid to use scare tactics to get it. They actually went as far as hiring men to impersonate law enforcement. They called them community enforcement. They dressed them up in tactical gear, armed them with fake badges, and sent them out like they were real police. Their target? A black homeowner who had lived in that neighborhood for years. A man who paid his dues, who followed the rules, and who kept his property in perfect shape. But the HOA didn't like him. Maybe it was prejudice, maybe it was intimidation, maybe it was just that he didn't bow down to their authority. Whatever the reason, they thought they could scare him into compliance by sending their fake police right to his front door. So picture the scene. It's a warm afternoon. Neighbors are outside, curious eyes peeking from behind blinds. The fake officers step onto his lawn with their heavy boots, their sunglasses reflecting the sunlight. They bark orders, try to assert control. But instead of fear, instead of panic, the man stays calm. He doesn't flinch, he doesn't argue, he looks them straight in the eye. Because here's what they didn't know. This man had spent years with the FBI. He had taken down drug cartels, infiltrated organized crime rings, and even worked undercover in some of the most dangerous operations imaginable. He had stared down real killers, real threats. Compared to that, these fake tough guys were nothing. One of them reaches for his cuffs. The other places his hand on his weapon, just for show. The neighbors gasp. Some even start recording with their phones. They think they're about to see a man dragged away. But what happens next flips the entire situation upside down. The man calmly raises his voice, not in anger but with authority. He asks them for their credentials. He asks them which department they're from, what their badge numbers are, and who authorized this arrest. They hesitate. Their voices stumble. Their confidence cracks. Because they weren't prepared for questions. They were prepared for compliance. The neighbors begin to whisper. Something doesn't feel right. Then, with a slow, deliberate move, the man pulls out his wallet. Inside is not just a driver's license, it's his federal badge. The golden seal of the FBI shines in the sunlight. The silence is deafening. The fake officers freeze, their mouths dry up, because suddenly they realize the tables have turned. They aren't in control anymore. He identifies himself, not loudly, but firmly. Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation. And in that moment, every ounce of fake power those men thought they had evaporates. The neighbors who were watching now start to understand what's happening. Phones are still recording, but now the story has shifted. It's no longer about a man being arrested. It's about frauds being exposed. The fake officers try to backpedal. They say it's just a misunderstanding. They say they're only here to enforce HOA rules, but the agent doesn't buy it. He knows impersonating law enforcement is a federal crime. He knows these men could face years behind bars for what they're doing. He steps closer, his presence alone enough to make them sweat. Because this isn't just a homeowner anymore. This is someone who knows the law inside and out. someone who has the authority to shut this entire operation down. He calls for backup. Not the local police, federal agents. Within minutes, unmarked cars roll up. Real officers step out. The fake ones don't even try to resist. Their hands go up, their weapons fall to the ground. They're cuffed and read their rights. The neighbors can't believe what they're seeing. The very men who came to intimidate are now being led away in shame. But the story doesn't end there. Because once the FBI begins digging, they uncover just how deep this scam goes. The HOA wasn't just overstepping. They were operating like a private militia. They had contracts with fake enforcement groups. They had been harassing multiple homeowners, mostly minorities, using fear as a weapon. And it was all illegal. The agent makes sure every single one of them is held accountable. The fake cops face charges for impersonating officers, carrying weapons without authority, and unlawful intimidation. The HOA leaders face federal investigations into corruption, fraud, and civil rights violations. What they thought was just. Another day of flexing power turns into the downfall of their entire scheme. And for the community? Everything changes. People who had stayed quiet out of fear now speak up. They share their stories. They stand together. And they thank the very man who refused to be bullied, the FBI agent who reminded everyone what real authority looks like. This story spread far beyond that neighborhood. News outlets picked it up. Social media exploded with the footage. Millions of people watched the video of fake officers trying to arrest the wrong man. And the reaction was the same everywhere. Shock, disbelief, and then satisfaction. Because for once, the people abusing power didn't win. They got exposed, they got humiliated, and they got justice handed right back to them. But let's pause for a second and think about the bigger picture. What does it say about a system where private organizations can create fake police forces to harass people? What does it say about a society where someone has to flash a federal badge just to be treated with respect in their own yard? The truth is, this wasn't just about one man and two imposters. It was about control. It was about who gets to feel safe in their own home. And it was about what happens when that false sense of authority is challenged by the real thing. By the time it was all over, the fake officers were sitting in federal holding cells. The HOA leaders were lawyering up, scrambling to explain themselves. And the agent? He went back to his life, calm as ever. For him, it was just another day standing up to people who think they're above the law. The fallout from that day didn't just stop with 2 arrests. It started a chain reaction that nobody in that neighborhood saw coming. For years, the HOA had ruled like they were untouchable. They sent threatening letters, handed out unfair fines, and used fear to keep people quiet. But now, their power was crumbling, and it all began with one confrontation on a front lawn. The video of the incident spread like wildfire online. Millions of views in just a few days. People were outraged, not just at the fake officers, but at the idea that this could even happen in the first place. News anchors asked the same question again and again. How could an HOA hire fake cops and get away with it for so long? The FBI agent didn't chase the spotlight. He wasn't out to become famous. But the public demanded answers, and he knew that if he stayed silent, the HOA would spin the story. So he stepped forward. In interviews, he explained what really happened. He explained how impersonating an officer isn't just illegal, it's dangerous. Because once fake authority is allowed to exist, nobody's safe. What happens if someone calls for help and the wrong people show up? What happens when fear is disguised as law? Those questions hit hard, especially in communities that had already felt the sting of discrimination. Behind the scenes, the investigation deepened. Federal agents combed through records. They found that the HOA had been funneling thousands of dollars into these so-called community enforcement programs. Homeowners' fees, the money people thought was going toward landscaping, maintenance, and neighborhood improvements, had been secretly funding intimidation squads. Families were paying for their own harassment without even knowing it. The FBI traced financial documents, emails, and contracts. They found meetings where HOA board members openly discussed targeting certain residents. And again, the same pattern appeared. The majority of those targeted were minorities, people who didn't fit the HOA's idea of what their perfect community should look like. It wasn't just harassment. It was discrimination dressed up as neighborhood rules. The agent, who had lived quietly among them for years, now became a symbol of resistance. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down started knocking on his door. They thanked him for standing up. They shared their own stories. A Latina family recounted how they'd been fined for painting their door a shade too bright. An elderly couple admitted they'd been threatened over keeping a garden that didn't meet HOA standards. One by one, people came forward, realizing they weren't alone. Court cases began piling up. Civil rights lawyers jumped in. The Department of Justice took notice. Suddenly, what started as a single confrontation was now a federal case exposing systemic abuse. The HOA leaders, once smug and powerful, were now facing years in prison. Their empire of fear had collapsed under the weight of truth. But the part of the story people loved most wasn't just the arrests or the court cases. It was the image of those fake officers standing frozen, their authority ripped away in an instant when the FBI badge flashed in front of them. That single moment became symbolic. It represented every time someone in power tried to bully, intimidate, or silence another person, only to be stopped cold by the truth. The agent himself never bragged. He didn't need to. His calm, unshaken response told the story better than any words could. While the fake cops shook and stumbled, he never once raised his voice. He never once looked afraid, because he knew exactly who he was, and he knew the law was on his side. That quiet confidence, that unshakable presence, became what people admired most. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The HOA had thought they could intimidate him because they believed he was just another homeowner, just another black man they could push around. What they didn't know was that they had picked the wrong target. The man they thought they could scare was the one man who could and would dismantle their entire operation. As the weeks passed, the neighborhood transformed. The yellow caution tape came down. Families that once lived in fear started walking their streets freely. People decorated their homes without worrying about being fined. And slowly, trust began to rebuild. But the scars were still there. Everyone remembered how quickly things had spiraled, and everyone remembered how close they had come to losing their peace completely. The FBI agent, though, carried himself the same way he always had. He went to work, came home, and lived simply. To him, this wasn't about glory. It was about sending a message that no one, not an HOA, not fake cops, not anyone, had the right to abuse authority, and that if they tried, there would always be someone ready to stand against them. The story reached across the UK and the US, sparking debates about power, race, and justice. People questioned the role of HOAs, the unchecked power they sometimes held, and the way ordinary families could be bullied under the guise of community rules. Lawmakers started drafting reforms. Some states introduced stricter regulations on how HOAs could operate. Others pushed for harsher penalties for anyone impersonating law enforcement. Real change began to take shape. And all of it started because two fake cops showed up at the wrong house. It's rare that a single moment can ripple outward to affect thousands of lives, but that's exactly what happened here. What was meant to be a quiet act of intimidation turned into a nationwide conversation. And it left a lasting lesson. Never mistake silence for weakness. Never mistake calm for submission. Because sometimes, the quietest man in the room is the one holding all the power. That day, in that neighborhood, the balance of power shifted. It wasn't just about an HOA or fake police. It was about justice, about dignity, about what happens when you stand up instead of backing down. And as the dust settled, one truth remained. Authority without integrity is nothing but a costume. And costumes can be stripped away in an instant. So whenever people talk about this story, whenever they replay the footage of those fake cops standing dumbstruck in the front yard, they don't just see a confrontation. They see justice. They see courage. They see the moment when fear lost and truth won. And most of all, they see the reminder that even when it looks like the odds are against you, one person's resolve can change everything. That's why this story stuck. Not just because of the drama, not just because of the arrests, but because it showed that power is only real when it's backed by truth. Everything else is just an act.